Quarkus Insights, Episode 17, What's New in Metrics, with special guests Erin Schnabel and Ken Finnegan. Hello, everybody. I'm Jason Green, Quarkus co-founder, and your host for today. And we have a great show lined up. We're going to talk a lot about metrics. And I have with me, of course, the incredible, amazing Max Anderson. How's it going, Max? And you're broadcasting from a new location today, if I understand correctly.
Yes, well, it looks the same for you guys, but yeah, literally moved every cable, every screen, like in the last 12 hours. Haven't got any sleep, but it works now, I hope. So,
Excellent. All right, yeah, that's. So if you have to take a nap, that's okay. We won't be sad. And so, guys, this is great because we have, as I mentioned, we have special guests. We have Yoda and Darth Vader here. to walk us through metrics. So why don't we start with Erin? Erin, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Okay. So I was at IBM for 20. It was literally going to be my 21st anniversary, except I started that day on Red Hat. So that's my new thing. Oh my God. I've been doing Java development since I think we decided when I had a podcast with Adam Bean that it's since 1.1-ish. Yeah. So I wrote all the early stuff for Liberty. I've been doing all kinds of hacky wonkiness since then. The most important relevant thing for today is I make really ridiculous things. That's like how I learn and teach others, is just making things that make no sense. That's what
I do. Fantastic. And so I have to ask, just because I started this whole thing on Twitter this weekend, which is what was your first IDE that you ever used?
Ultra Edit.
Ultra
Do you
Edit.
remember that? Do you remember?
No, I don't never used Ultra Edit. Oh.
It was just a text editor at the time, but especially when I started to do, I used to do. Well, yeah, yes, but that was when that was the first one I used at work. It was probably like Emacs at school. I think I did Emacs instead of VI back then. But the thing with Ultra, when I started on doing mainframe stuff. And with mainframes, when you're doing like ASCII and EBCDIC conversion, which of course I had to do because it's the mainframe, we had like debug stuff in columns. So you had your bytes, you had your EBCDIC, and you had your ASCII, so you could like find eye catchers. And Ultra Edit could copy and paste in columns.
Oh, that's cool.
So it's like that was what I needed. I needed to be able to do columns, so I used that one all the time. I think it still exists. I'm pretty sure it still exists. It's a thing.
There was an editor called Nedit, I think, that did column cut and paste back in the day.
Yeah, I don't remember. Like I was running Gentoo for a long time, and I honestly can't remember it was probably Eclipse, because Eclipse was years and years and years. Like once I got full time into Java and not so much into in assembler and C, then Eclipse came in. So I think when I was running Gentoo, that was pre-kids. Once I had kids, it's Gentoo stuff. No, I can't. No time. I can't do it.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thanks, Erin. So Ken, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself?
So I've been doing Java development for about 20 years now. I've been at Red Hat for nearly 10, and for the last 4 years. Basically, since MicroProfile was first created, I've been the kind of architect for Red Hat and figuring all that out from a technical perspective. Kind of trying not to annoy John Klingon from the business side too much at the same time.
Oh.
That's awesome. And you have to tell me about your first IDE. What was it?
Well, when you asked that, it got me thinking. It's like the one I can remember was like Ball and Delphi.
Borland!
Nice.
Oh my God, I forgot about Borland.
But
I think
part of me
terrible.
wants to say there was probably one earlier than that, because Delphi would have been like maybe mid-90s, maybe early 90s. Yeah, but I was using Macs at high school in the late 80s, early 90s. So there might have been another one there, but I can't remember its name.
Oh,
That's
and
awesome.
We were early IBM. We used that Visual Age for Java thing too. That was terrible.
Oh God, I remember that.
There's all these Java editors that I never used, or Java IDEs. Like I saw a popular one was JBuilder. A lot of people said JBuilder. I never used JBuilder.
Yeah, I used JBuilder a lot.
And I never used Visual Age. Yeah.
I think JBuilder was the first IDE I used with Java in like 2000.
I think that was why I used Ultra Edit, because Visual Age for Java sucked.
That's awesome. So before we get into our metrics thing, I just want to do some sort of house cleaning, my normal news update and so on. So first of all, thank you everybody who's tuning into the show. I just want to say thank you for joining. And if you're new to this, basically the key to the Quarkus Insights is we give you an update into what's going on today in the community. And we one of the things that we like to do is try to keep the show as dynamic as possible. So please interrupt us anytime you want to, post a question, and I'll get our guests off guard and call them on it right then. Sorry, Erin. Sorry, Ken.
You can't catch me off guard. I'm random as it is. It's all good.
Yeah. So, and it looks like we have our first comment, which no, I have to apologize as well because we're using some new software, or at least I'm using some new software, and I don't know how to show it. I think I got to click on it apparently. Oh, that's too hard. There we go. Hi, Jonathan. Okay, so and with that, that's right. I was going to do a news update. So you guys feel free to jump in if I miss anything major. But essentially, the big, well, first I just need to tune in real quick, get into the Quarkus matrix.
You meant to have a Death Star behind you because Erin and I have Star Wars. It's like you needed something Star Wars.
Yeah, we're not having consistent themes here. We gotta fix that. Oh, and by the way, I identified you as Yoda, and I realized, when it was close up, it's actually Baby Yoda. So,
yeah. Baby Yoda.
Yeah,
child. Yep.
Yeah, that's a huge step. You can't get that one wrong. Okay, 1.8 is just about to be out the door. We're aiming for Wednesday-ish. And there's been a lot of improvements. Thank you, everybody who's tested 1.8 Sierra 1. Some things that have changed that we fixed, and Quartz has had a lot of changes. The documentation has been improved. DBT support, which is missing, is included. You can change instance names, so it works better if you have multiple configurations. The documentation for Funky is improved when it comes to using Google Cloud. So if you're using Google Cloud with Funky, now you can actually dive into it and see a bit more descriptions instead of having to read our source, which we do encourage you to do, but I know that you don't always have the time to. JBang has had fixes. So hopefully you caught last week's show. Sorry I wasn't here for that one. It was, from what I hear, it was a fantastic show where we dived into JBang, and you'll see that Quarkus is starting to incorporate JBang in more places, and it really helps, sort of rapidly develop your application. So there's been some fixes to improve that experience. And then with Hibernate, you can generate actual schemas in the database, save them in the database in addition to tables. And then finally, we have some cool debug facilities, like you can dump transform classes. But not just 1.8, we're also looking at 1.9. And in 1.9, you have the ability to do bean validation in reactive routes, which is kind of cool because, if you switch from using JAX-RS style endpoints to using reactive endpoints where you can do pure DOM blocking, there's no worker thread involved. That means sometimes you give up on some of the technologies, but in this case, now we have validation integrated, so you can actually do validation of parameters and so on, which is pretty cool. And then we broke off the Mutiny stuff from the Mutiny client. It's now a separate extension that you could use. So if you're writing a pure client application and you want to do some reactive stuff, you don't have to worry about pulling in the full server. So, so another question here. It's a critical question. Am I Neo? And the answer is yes. No, I'm I need to do the whoa, and I need the longer hair. Well, no, Neo didn't have long hair. That's right.
No, I didn't.
And mixing genres here. Okay, so with that, I can finally get back to our show. And once again, you guys have to apologize. So let's get started with. I'll hand the puck back to Erin.
Oh my God! Right to me. So I guess within the theme of what's new for 1.8. The most exciting thing for me is it was my first day at Red Hat, and it was the day that the Micrometer extension that I wrote merged into master for 1.8. So I was like, super welcome to Red Hat present. The process to get to that extension was kind of interesting. So if we go back in time, make Wayne's World noises. If we go back in time to last September, it's actually been a year. I like to tell this story so people understand like the crazy shit that I do. Excuse me, French, Anglo-Saxon. So I volunteered because I'm completely bananas to be a dungeon master for my son. He's 10 at the time, and I didn't properly give him a limit on how many friends. So I ended up with a table of 6 boys, and my daughter, who would, we created a pixie character for her so she could, swoop in and do her thing and leave again. But anyway, I volunteered to do that. And like if you talk to some of the micrometer or the MP metrics folks, they will tell you that I was harassing them about application specific metrics for like 3 years or something. And about the same time, or actually before that, I had said, I'm going to submit a talk to Spring IO actually, to really show application specific metrics. Cause I'm like, yeah, we're not getting enough attention to this. Every time people talk about metrics, they talk about JVM heap and throughput. And I'm like, there's more to this picture. So I had submitted a talk, and of course, Spring IO is in September, and I was doing this in September, and I'm like, I got to run out of brain capacity. So you smush them together, right? That's what you do. So I created this ridiculous application that's monsters. It's literally D&D monsters fighting each other. So I could learn combat rules. But the nice part about learning combat rules is I got to take all of the application specific metrics and like play with them. And I did it in a different way. And I learned some very interesting things with that first pass. Namely, I did a lot of stuff wrong. So I made another version of that app. And when I made the second version, I did both a Spring one and a Quarkus one. And it's because I found some real limitations with MP metrics, to be honest. And it mostly has to do with how statistics are aggregated across instances. So I did a bunch of stuff with Spring, right, to create all this statistical data. And then I was like, okay, so now I'll make an MP metrics one. And I went right to Quarkus to do it. And I couldn't get the same data out. It literally didn't, like apples and oranges. I couldn't produce the same data. So I'm like, okay, so I will just try Micrometer as a core library with Quarkus, and it worked fine. And it went into native mode and everything was great. So that was DevNexus. At DevNexus, I had a second version of my talk that had a much better app. And it had a Spring and a Quarkus application, both having monsters fighting each other. And I can show you what the dashboards look like. And I was able to get data out to do those. And then from that, I was like, well, can I make an extension? And so I did. And that worked okay. And then I had Ken, can you come look at my extension? So I drew Ken in, and he started playing with my ridiculously silly monster combat application. And he started to understand what I was saying about the difference in how metrics are used and calculated. And so then we did the work to get it into Quarkus main. So one of the things that we had to do,
before you go, can you
go ahead?
So yeah. Just because I just 2 questions, because I saw one, Alice's house was saying, how should I start learning Quarkus?
Sure.
So I just want to maybe cover that quickly. Alice's house, so if you go to Quarkus.io, there's a getting started button, top of the site. It walks you through all the basics.
The other thing I would say is write a ridiculous application.
Yes, that's the other way.
See, that's what I was thinking as you're doing this story. I was like, oh, this whole story is actually like a learning Quarkus story, although it's a little bit more hardcore because you went right into writing extensions.
Well, so I did the Quarkus app first, right? And I tried to make the equivalent of the Spring app. So I had my Spring app, and I'm like, okay, so how do I do the same app in Quarkus? And that was when I figured out that the small array metrics extension wasn't going to get me what I needed. So that was when I just brought in the Micrometer library. So that was fine. And I had to figure out like the little options that you have to do to get Jandex to go index the third-party library, right? That wasn't too bad.
And the other one, just to catch everyone up to speed, like maybe can you just cover what is the metric stuff we have in Quarkus before you start marking it? Like what does it do, what's intended, that kind of thing.
Okay, so the small array metrics extension is an implementation, I guess you would say, Ken, of the MP metrics, the MicroProfile Metrics spec. And that, historically, it has roots in DropWizard. And so the way it calculates metrics, the way it surfaces metrics is based on how DropWizard calculations work. So it's a lot of pre-calculation of histogram buckets, pre-calculation of percentile buckets. And the problem that I ran into is that when you have those pre-calculated buckets, they can't aggregate across instances. You've lost the data points that you need to be able to aggregate data across instances. It's solo instance data, right? It doesn't aggregate well.
So I'll just maybe go a level up higher, saying that the metrics profile metrics in Quarkus,
whatever it is, MicroProfile metrics. Yeah.
Right. What it does, once you add the extension, it will expose an endpoint that you can use in Prometheus and that kind of thing to get the data. Right? And then what you're talking about is the engine behind that is serving up, that's calculating those numbers, is behaving differently, whether you're doing MicroProfile metrics or Micrometer, and that's where the thing starts being different. That's why we looked in 1.8. Hey, could have a Micrometer.
Exactly. So what ended up happening is I started looking at how the metrics was behaving and the data that it was pulling out and the SRE situation for which data that you need. And from a cloud service industry perspective, the difference in supported backends. So Micrometer is an abstraction. It is a vendor neutral metrics library where the vendors that you're being neutral to are your metrics backends, right? That's a Prometheus, Datadog, StatsD, Influx, New Relic. You know, it's all of those metric services that are gathering and visualizing your metrics, and that's what Micrometer is a facade in front of. So I was looking at how to bring that in because I saw a lot of support out in the ecosystem with Micrometer, people providing Micrometer binders. And I just felt that Quarkus should have a way to take advantage of that, to go a little faster in terms of how many backends it can support, right? So that's where that came from. So the Micrometer extension will provide a Prometheus endpoint, or the MP Metrics extension can provide a Prometheus endpoint. Mechanically, how they do that is a little different. One of the changes we actually made in 1.7 that I put in was to we provided a build item in core, so that instead of using the metrics capability flag or looking for config across extensions, there is a metrics capability build item and a metrics factory build item, or I think it's metrics factory build item or metrics factory consumer. It's a consumer, so that extensions that don't want to care about the metrics library can use and register metrics, and it can go to either extension. And we can make sure, because of the way that works, that there's only one of the two extensions enabled. Yep. So we catch and make sure that you're not going to have conflicting extensions.
Nice. So when do we see some code?
I can show you code. Which code do you want to see first? You want to see the ludicrous monster combat application, or you want to see the extension? What do you want to see? I can show it off.
Let's start with the end result. Get people to what most people will be working with is probably the end result. Like, what does it do, and the app. The extension we can get to, but I think we got to lose.
Graphs are pretty, so that's all.
Graphs are pretty.
Start it with.
Yeah.
All right, which screen am I showing? You got it showing? That's
the IDE.
I see.
That is actually the extension. So if I look at my ridiculous monster combat application, which is literally, it is totally ludicrous. So here's the Quarkus app, for example. So I have a super simple combat endpoint where I can make any number of monsters between 2 to 6 fight, or I can make 2 fight, or I can make 3 to whatever. I'll show you why that matters in a second. But what I did, and I actually think this maps to a meter binder pattern, which meter binder is a Micrometer class. I actually would recommend this pattern generally for people using metrics. Notice I have no metrics annotations in here at all. And that's because what I've done here, and I did this for this app, I did it on purpose so that I'd be able to compare implementations of metrics. That was my intent anyway. So I have a metrics class, which is injected actually up here, combat metrics. I have a metrics class, and that means here I'm calling out, right, to register the end of a round. And here I'm calling out to register an end of an encounter. And what that means is, if I go to my combat metrics class, it means all of the metrics that I want to register, all of the labels that I use, all of the tags that I use, the names, right? I can see them all here. If I change if I change which implementation of a metrics library that I use, it's all in this one place. I am deliberately not using annotations. I know a lot of people really like annotations, but I will tell you that the real power when you're looking at dimensional metrics, when you're trying to use dimensional data to do any kind of analysis, comes when you have dynamic values in your tags. You got to have that finite set, right, of what your possible values are, but you only get really good data or useful data when you are able to switch those tag values. And that's really hard to do with annotations unless you make like 15 different annotated things. So Micrometer as a library makes it really cheap to have a deferred, like there's just re-register the thing. It will be smart enough to know, okay, this counter already exists or whatever. So it knows how to be really smart, which means my code could be really stupid comparatively, and I could just pretend I'm registering everything again. In this case, they use distribution summaries, which is a kind of, okay, I should take a step back. I'm sorry, I'm going really fast.
Well, quick question for you, Erin, while you're thinking about that is, so somebody who's probably new to metrics may be thinking, so when you say dimensional data, what are you referring to, like in a metric system?
So where do I have it? If I go into my Prometheus time series graph, and I can just look at any one of these daisies. Let's just pull this one, if I execute this one. So I have with this one number, so when you're talking about dimensional data, you're still always looking at, this is too small, isn't it?
Yeah, zoom in just a tad. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so when you're looking at metrics data, you're always measuring one number. And let me tell you, once you start really splicing dimensions, you want to have other numbers be numbers, like, but this univariate, right? You're coming down to one number, and then you have different ways you can slice that number or view that number. These are different dimensions I can use for grouping different things. So which one actually, if I do this one instead, oops, not FICE, dice. I have dice rolls, right? And so one of the things that I was looking at is how my dice behave. So you can see, here's my D10s, right? I can see how many times a D10 was rolled. I'm looking across my two apps. I have both Spring and Quarkus running right now. So I have two apps giving me the same data. If I go to my dashboard, oh, these are, well, you'll see them. The numbers are squished, but you can tell it goes 1 to 20. So I can combine, so this is using a couple different dimensions of my data dimensions, right? So if I show you the math here, are you gonna render? What are you doing? I don't know why, there it is, it's scrolling. Go figure why Grafana looks funny, I don't even know. So I can sum by the face, that was one of the tags where it says I'm gonna roll a 10, right? Or I rolled a 10 on a 20, or I rolled a 1 on a 20, that's the face. So I can take all of the data about the dice rolls of a 20-sided die, right? So here's my dice, and I'm looking at a D20 instead of a D10, but you can see here's the D12, right? And here's the face. So I can group all of the rolls, excuse me, of a D20 over a time interval by the face, and that's what gives me this graph. So I can see how often a 12 was rolled or how often an 18 was rolled. And then comparatively, right, I can look at all this. Now, when I first plotted this, the very first time I created this data in my app using the code that I showed you, the D12 was completely flat. Like it had two places, I think. It was like a 4 and a 5 had a number, and like the whole back half of the roll was flat, which was a bug. Like it was a bug that I didn't see, that my test didn't catch, that I had no way of figuring out. And it ended up like I had forgotten a switch statement or something. And that's one of the things metrics will show you and can surface because it's looking at so many more values in aggregate. And it's information you can't get easily from looking at test logs, because then you have to know what it does. So Joel, I see, is asking, Vertex has a micrometer module. So what I did I can answer that question. With the Micrometer extension, I have I have Vertex in it already. So Vertex is being instrumented for the HDP case. And I did that for a different reason. Do I have it in here? Yes. Oh, nope, that's the Quarkus one. Or that's the Spring one. I'm running it on my other machine because, you know, it's like chefs in the oven. Oh, crap. Where did I put it? There. Okay. So when I wrote the Quarkus extension, excuse me, I wanted to get the same instrumentation out. Again, I'm aggregating across Spring and Quarkus. So I wanted to get the same information out that Spring produces, the attackers. This is when you start worrying about infinite things like bites and claws and talons and swords all the way down at the bottom. People talk about cardinality explosion and worry about it, and really they shouldn't. Where is it? It's in here somewhere. Why am I not seeing it? Where's my handy dandy search button? Do I not have it in this one? I might not have it in this one. This might be running an older version. I think it is. So I have, I do have the Vertex, instrumentation present. I did not use the Vertex micrometer module as it is, and that's because the micrometer, the 3.x micrometer module that exists, it like stands up its own instance in a way of micrometer. So it's not something that was going to be easy to pull into and make a native Quarkus. You know, it wasn't going to be easy to make it Quarkus native, so to speak. So if you were to go look in the Quarkus code base, the way micrometer works, you have the like kind of core micrometer library, and then you have meter binders, which are what pick your library that's registering metrics with however many registries you have enabled. And so with the binders we have enabled, we have an adapter for MP metrics and we have a Vertex binder. So it is instrumenting HTTP code to do, it's at least the HTTP server side, to basically emit very similar metrics to what Spring does. So I can take a Spring app and a Quarkus app and measure them together and get all the results in the same expected way. So that's what I did for that. And I know I'm hopping around a lot, but that's Erin for you. So.
And I think that kind of ties into one of the very interesting things from my perspective, which was with MP metrics. Until very recently, there wasn't any requirement for endpoints or anything like that for runtimes to output metrics. So recently, I think in the most recent version that came out in like June? No, it would have been February. I think there was an addition to have optional REST endpoint metric come out from MicroProfile Metrics. But until then, and obviously they need to do it, it's only optional. Prior to that, if you added MicroProfile Metrics to your application, other than like what they call base metrics around JVM, there was no metrics that came out when you ran it. So, but with Micrometer, because of all the meter binders that are in the universe of various Java frameworks, you can add that to your project, not do anything in the application code, and you get a whole bunch of interesting metrics coming out around HTTP endpoints, all this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of like free stuff that you get when you use Micrometer that isn't there with MP metrics.
Okay. And Erin, in your demo, not demo app, your crazy whatever app you call it, just I want to make clear that can you maybe just show how you activate the metrics? Because I don't want to. I'll say that the example you show here is a standard application, but the way you collect metrics is depending on Micrometer, right? So
this one is, yes, and it's all contained within this one class. But the way Micrometer works, what did I just open? I opened not what I wanted. I wanted this one. So Micrometer is pretty. This is actually my extension. This isn't the one that's been rolled into 1.8. I haven't merged this one. I haven't brought the latest. I know this is my draft. This is my draft. Yes. I haven't updated this project to 1.8 yet because that's fresh hot off the presses. But this is this is the kind of stuff that ends up happening, right? So, and this is my Monster Combat core, but what ends up happening is you enable the Quarkus extension, and then you enable whatever registry you want. And you can do multiples. So within the Quarkus code base, from an integration test standpoint, oh goodness, where are those? We have a few different tests for Micrometer to show this. So we have one that has Prometheus enabled, one that has MP Metrics enabled, and one that has JMX enabled. And the difference with these is literally like which registry is enabled, and the other one is not enabled. So you only get one.
Okay. So and if for some reason you want to have an app that can use both, then that's when the annotation becomes an advantage, right?
I would say that the Micrometer, I would prefer the Micrometer API because you add multiple registries and you get multiple registries, right? Sure. I can add Stackdriver here and get it going to both Prometheus and Stackdriver, and I don't have to change my code. It's completely oblivious. My code is my code. So,
what I'm asking for is like, because I don't actually know the answer. Like, I know in yours you're using the specific micrometer to do your, let's say, fancy app-specific collection, which is good, but it ties you to micrometer. But if you were just using, let's say, like, if you just have do we have a way to your app could report? You could just change the dependency to Micrometer or MicroProfile, and the metrics would be collected and reported to whatever backend they support? Or are they completely different?
You could, they are completely different. So the Micrometer extension does support the MP Metrics style annotations. So those do work with the Micrometer extension. So if you're using those annotations, then by all means use the, go ahead and use those annotations and then turn on the Micrometer extension and the data will come out. Based on my experience and the way the binders work, I would never recommend that you do that. Like, I would never recommend that you use annotations ever. I just don't, it's not smart, right? I'm going to be honest. It's just not smart. Everybody thinks it's great. And it's like, only if you need a priori a gauge once and you're never going to use a dimension that has any meaning.
Sure.
Yeah, and that's something I certainly learnt when Erin first started bringing me on this journey, was that annotations are great, and they were great for MP metrics at the time because there wasn't automatic generation of metrics from endpoints. So you needed annotations on the methods to get the metrics out. But when you have something like Micrometer that has the meter binder that does all that behind the scenes for you, there's no real need for like tracing metrics, if you want to call it that give you information about method calls. And you really want to use metrics for real business metrics. And for that, after like seeing Combat Monster and playing with it, it's like the only way that makes sense is to actually use an API. You can't do that through annotations and have it make sense.
It's the tag values, right? If you really want to use dimensional data for what it's good at, you need to be able to change the tag values, which means really late with all the information that you have with the result of the call or the result of the activity or whatever. You need that really late recording. You can't do that off an annotation.
Yeah.
So a question, so one of the things that you mentioned, Ken, is you talked about that there's this example, the Monster application, you looked at that, Combat Monster. So is that actually available as open source? So I'm sure you're probably going to give information on it, or is it kind of just a local project you currently have, Erin?
It is out in the wild. Boolean is my thingy, Monster Combat. It's out. Awesome. It is absolutely out. It is out there for free. Use it and abuse it. I got to bring it up to 1.8 now, obviously. But yeah, no, go play with it, because I feel like this is what lets people really understand why dimensional metrics work. I feel like we do a disservice when we talk about metrics when all we do is work on heap size. Do you know what I mean? Because heap size doesn't give you a good understanding of what it's for. You know, and most of the time, if you have heap size, you also have like a pre-canned dashboard that you use, which means you're not understanding what you can learn from metrics. So.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like you need more than just JVM stats, and you need.
So when I was doing this, so to go back to my story of what I was even trying to do with this, right? I was going to take 10-year-old boys who are now 11, right, through D&D stuff. I was completely worried about understanding combat mechanics, right? Not just the rules, but like what's expected behavior? How often do monsters do good things? You know, like, so I use this to be able to figure out, okay, here's how often, and this is from this is the same data sliced using different dimensions, right? So like if it's an armor class hit or if it's one that requires a DC save, right? So it's like I could start to pull out, here's how often we use different kinds of hits and misses, right? So it's like your spell save DC hits, like they happen like not very frequently. And I can see it over here that they happen way less, right? But it's like, okay, the DC ones, all right, I understand that. You save those more often than not. And I learned how much the difficulty class was. I learned, if any of you are total nerds, that like an attack requiring a spell save DC is basically a critical hit, which, you kind of know, but you didn't really know. It's nuts. And I learned if you play Dungeons and Dragons, like lightning and poison damage reliably will wreck you. They will wreck you. So like when you're making your characters, don't neglect your constitution score, because lightning and damage, poison specifically, which is what your constitution's for, it will wreck you. That was my learning lesson.
You completely lost me, but it sounds really fun.
But I mean, this is the same, like my point from a metrics perspective is this is the same data. I'm getting all of this information and feedback, and I'm able to look at all of this because I can aggregate all of the monster I can aggregate all of the combats that are happening, and I'm just slicing my dimensions differently to pull this data out.
I just got a crazy idea. Like with JBang, I've been playing with the flight recorder. Does Micrometer has a way to send this data as JFR events?
We'd have to look to see if there's a registry for it.
It's a misuse of the system, but I just realized that could be useful.
No, there's no such thing as misuse of the system. Are you kidding me? That's when you learn all kinds of good stuff. That's when you do dumb things that make no sense. I told you, I do dumb things that make no sense.
That's one thing I just wanted to mention is, it's interesting that all the stuff that you're talking about, Erin, when you're going on all these discoveries that you made about relative like effects of spells and things like that being different. This is, I think, a key part about building services, cloud native services, that you deploy your application and then it evolves quickly, right? You're supposed to have rapid innovation, and if you don't have a feedback loop,
that's right.
It's hard for you to really know where to go or how to take it or where the problems are. And then with the system like this, you can actually figure out, I didn't actually realize that the axis patterns were going this way, and so I need to actually change my architecture a little bit.
Yeah, so that feeds into this one. So when I was writing the app, I was like, oh man, I'm making decisions. If I have 3 monsters fighting, how do they decide what monster to hit? I have to write an algorithm for how they choose what monster to hit. And I was like, well, does it matter how they choose? So I wrote a couple different ways to sort the collection, basically, so that they would pick which monster to hit. And so I could compare here, like, what's your average rounds per encounter? If you pick the highest, like if you pick the lowest health monster first or the highest health monster first, right? If you pick the highest health monster first, you have like more encounters that way. It's like my choices about how these combats work, like they have an impact. So if I was a game designer and I wanted to introduce a new algorithm, I would be able to see how that compares and to see if it has the effect that I want, either a longer encounter or a shorter encounter, right? Let's say I know my players are getting bored and I want to change something. I can see then how that's going. And it's that kind of thing.
Okay. Very cool. We haven't got any specific new questions. Do you have more about metrics from the end user? Do you want to try maybe tell us a bit about the extensions?
So, how do you want to do this, Ken? You should talk. I've been talking the whole time.
Not the whole time.
Ken should talk.
What to say?
He was taking notes, like, so when he plays D&D.
Yeah, well,
then he's reading.
That's right. He's right.
To be honest, Dungeons and Dragons is something that I've never gotten into, either younger or later in life. But it was certainly interesting to play with the Combat Monster app, and it really gave me a better understanding of the purpose of metrics and monitoring, because I think from my history, I'd mostly seen, and this is my own kind of like blinders on, I hadn't really looked at Micrometer and how it worked and what it did. So I was kind of like in the mindset of MP metrics of, oh, I'm annotating these things to get like method like metrics coming out. And that's kind of like how I was coming at it to start with. So seeing this app and seeing kind of like the more business kind of application metrics that you can output was certainly eye-opening. I'm certainly nowhere near understanding all the terms and like the histograms, distribution summaries, buckets, and all this kind of stuff. I'm still figuring all that out, but it's definitely a good way to see and understand metrics for those who aren't that familiar with what it can do and what it should do and all that kind of stuff.
I mean, I have to say, it pushes the boundary of what I understand. I know I have always had I can only get so close to statistics, then I'm like, no, run away, it's too hard. So it has been challenging for my grown-up brain to be like, no, I'm gonna stay right here in this stuff that's right on the edge of making me super uncomfortable. I do not like statistics, but I felt very strongly that throughput and heap measurements, like, it's not telling you enough about how your application is really behaving. And that it always really bothered me. And so it's actually funny. I gave another version of this talk, and John Schneider, who's the founder of the Micrometer library, was there. And we had the most interesting discussion afterwards, because he's like, wow, you actually came with a good use case for why averages matter. Like, I always end up doing distribution summaries and timers, and for him it's always like a decay period with time. It's like, but you came up with a solid use case for averages. I'm like, yay. Which was pretty funny. But that's only because I really don't like statistics, and I didn't want to get too much into histograms. Only so much at a time.
No, but I think this is great. Like, this is when you sat down and, when you were explaining and, I'm not saying explaining, you were expressing your concern that you couldn't. You were like, hey, I want to use Micrometer, and I'm like, why? Like this, like, what's the advantage? And when you went through and I go like, oh, like, I didn't even realize that it was that limited for the annotation. So
and I think it's just it's because of its heredity, right? Like, everything in Java has roots, which have roots, everything goes back eons. And Drop Wizard grew up in a hierarchical time frame, right? So you didn't have dimensions to deal with. So the way they aggregate and the way they pre-calculate has to do with where Drop Wizard came from. But now you want to do something native to the new cloud systems that you're monitoring, and those really, really, really encourage dimensional metrics because you get so much information back out.
Yeah, but I find it funny because what you're showing is not new, right? Like, this is useful for any kind of app, no matter where, being able to extract that kind of thing. So this is really fun.
Yeah, and I think that's the key thing, is understanding the behavior of your app, because we all make assumptions. Like, of course it goes like this and this happens.
Oh, man. So like if you go and watch my actual talk, like, the whole thing is how many freaking mistakes I caught that, like, running through tests. Like, I have huge test buckets that run, but nobody looks through the logs for the entire test. You look for, like, yay, succeeded, right? But it was like the dice, I forgot a switch statement. Granted, if I had a pair programmer, we would have figured that out and I wouldn't have forgotten to hook up my switch statement, right? So that was like a messed up D12. And then I had something else where I was looking for, it was, which window is it in? It's in,
By the way, while you're looking, just so you know, the reason we're not getting a ton of questions, We got a commenter saying that everything is well explained, so there's no questions needed. So that's
really
that
funny,
is quite the achievement.
But so like here, so people talk about cardinality explosion when they're worried about dimensions, right? And you want you do want a finite set of values, but how small that set has to be, like there's a lot of variation. But like here, I'm trying to take three booleans, and combine them into one string, right? Because I just need to know if it's critical hit or saved or whatever. And oh, where did my browser go? Where am I going? I'm here, right here. So if sorry, too many tabs. When I had this attack, it was so funny. So like the first couple times I tried to do this, you can see I have a hit, a miss, a critical hit, critical miss, saved hit. Those are all the combinations you can get in theory. I had a critical saved hit. Like, where does that even come from? I had no idea where that data even came from. I had a bug somewhere, would never have found it without like metrics telling me, that I had done something stupid. It just, like, the test data was too verbose, and the amount of permutations you need to catch that error, I wouldn't have been able to do it as a human. Aggregated data showed me that, and it was amazing. That was the first one. And then I did something else wrong. Oh, my odds were all wrong. Like that was so funny. I had misses, like critical hits and critical misses were happening like 4 or 5 times more often than misses, which is like, that's wrong. And I had, oh my God. So I scooped, to do this data, I scooped all of these monster definitions from the open resource stuff for Dungeons and Dragons. So I just scraped all the data from a wiki and I digested it into JSON. Regular expressions are you friend. Sometimes. I totally forgot like a little plus. So the highest armor class I had in all my monsters was a 9. But like, I wouldn't have noticed that, like that's the thing. Like when you do application specific metrics like this, you catch just dumb mistakes that you don't see until your app runs. And you know what I mean? Like you're not going to remember to test for that. Not with a data set that's got 200 monsters in it. The first time I tried it, I had 1,000 monsters in it, but that was really bad. I tossed it. That was really bad data. But that's why I feel like people have to really appreciate the value in testing the behavior of their application and not just 200s and 500s.
Yeah. So the beauty of that is that you're not responding to, customer user support cases for this kind of stuff, trying to reverse engineer what happened. You already know exactly what happened because you just look at your metrics dashboard and you can see this condition should not occur, and then it gets fixed before maybe even most of them even see it.
Yes.
So that's a pretty powerful feature. It gives you confidence that what you're deploying is going to be good as well, because you can, you could do like test deployments, canary tour sort of things. You could look at these metrics and then make an educated decision. Like otherwise, what do? You say, well, I'm not sending any HTTP error codes back, so I guess that's good.
Exactly. And the nice thing about Micrometer, for example, is that I can have I can record all of this data, and I can use meter filters, for example, to turn it off. In yes, by the way, that to answer that question, the Micrometer dashboards for system and JVM metrics will work because we're using those classes. So those dashboards will work just fine. Just import them. The data's all there. It's the same data. I can use a meter filter to disable these metrics. So like I showed you in the code, my combat metrics, right? I have encounter rounds, like that's the name of my metrics. And I have a couple of them, like, dice is always in or round is always in. I can use a regular expression, a starts with expression to turn off entire categories of metrics for either all registries or for a particular registry. And a common use case, as I have learned, is that you will have within a cloud environment, your ops team will give you a library that has certain things turned on and everything else turned off. And so they will actually, within that extension, register a Prometheus endpoint. Like they'll create their own Prometheus endpoint with just the metrics on that they want for the big operational view. And then within my app, I can have my operational view. And then if I'm going from test into production, I can just turn mine off. right? So it's like I have all these metrics that I can use for test and development, and then I can selectively turn some off so it's not so busy if I'm worried about behavior in a production system or how much data there is.
Yeah. So do you see the Juan is another question where he's asking if the most of the in Spring Boot are all the metrics that you would have configurable, are they also configurable in Quarkus?
So meter filters work the same way. So well, ish. So where's a good test? If I go back to my integration tests and I play with some things, where do I have those? Oh, I might even have them up in the test. I think I have them up in the Micrometer Extension test itself. So meter filters work the same way that they do elsewhere. We use CDI providers. No, it's going to be here to create meter filters. What I don't have yet, and I think I would want requests to make sure I understand what people actually want. Where is it going to be? I think here's one. No, crap. Where do I have that? Oh, goodness. I think I typed something. I mean, wrong. Like, I think I put a funny character up there. Partial sentences, Erin. Partial sentences don't have it happen anywhere. Yeah, like here's an example. Here's a meter filter that takes, this is actually in the MP Metrics test bucket. So I'm taking the prime resource full class name that comes out of an MP Metrics annotation, and I'm using a meter filter to rename it. It's a similar process for disabling things. So meter filters work the same. You can use a producer. What I don't have is a direct connection into Quarkus config yet. And I would really like input, I guess, on how people think that should work, because, you know, Quarkus, Spring has like this whole flat property system, and I don't know if that actually makes sense, or if you'd want it to be the same, or if using a meter filter is better because it can be richer, and then you could use a profile to turn them on or off. So I didn't put that in yet because I wasn't sure what people wanted. I figured I would wait until somebody asked and said, this is how I think it should work. And I'm like, okay, let's write that. That'll be great.
So Jason, June had a second question. You want to cover that one too?
I think I just did, didn't we? Or did I miss it?
No, the one was will the basic micrometer dashboard for system and development matrix be valid?
Yeah, yes, I answered that one.
Yeah, she answered that one live, and she's answering the questions before I even bring them up. So it's awesome. Cool.
I appreciate any input, and also, like, I think we only turned on Stackdriver, Datadog, JMX. We turned on Stackdriver, Datadog, JMX, and Prometheus. So whoever wants to do the next one. Yeah. Right, we can turn those on with help and testing.
Yeah. Do they all work in native?
Yes. No. Nope. I take it back. I have Stackdriver disabled right now for native mode because I think there were issues at the time with gRPC and some of those libraries. They were having trouble working in native mode. So if that's been fixed, then we can turn those back on. I had listed a bug in there somewhere.
And JMX doesn't work on native as well, right?
I may have turned JMX off also.
Yeah, JMX falls into that weird case where you have serialization involved. So there's some fuckiness there.
I have it turned off. So if you turn it on by accident and go to native mode, you'll get a nice message. And Stackdriver is the same. And it's because there was an issue with Stackdriver and Graal. We can go figure that out, right? But more tests would be great. More people making requests would be great. Go ahead.
I was going to say, because this is a great segue, because there's sort of two things I think, because we're getting close to the top of the hour. One is like, how do you quickly, if you're a user right now, you're not using metrics at all, say, like you're just using Quarkus, like how do you enable this? And then
turn on the Quarkus extension. Ta-da!
So it's list extensions. You see the Micrometer one in there. You add it. You're done, basically.
No, that's not true. There's two things. You have to turn the extension on, and then you have to select your registry.
Yeah.
So I didn't pack a registry by default because there's so many options to choose from. So I think if you use the quick start, it'll show you, and the docs will show you, like you just, so you do two things. You put the micrometer extension in and you add the Prometheus registry, which is typical of Micrometer. So if you want registries enabled, they try to minimize dependencies because they don't make the assumption that everybody is using Prometheus, because you have environments where you don't.
Cool. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so if you're, just to restate that, if you go to the Quarkus website and you click on the guides link, there's a guide in there that talks about how you do this. Is that live currently right now? I believe it is, right?
I believe it is. I believe it is. I did write it.
Well, the 1.8 is not going live until.
Yeah,
1.8's
not out just yet,
Yeah.
so maybe it's not on. I thought, for some reason, I thought we had published it early. Okay, never mind. So look soon. As soon as we release 1.8, you'll see the guide that's up there. But in the meantime, you can always look at the GitHub, Quarkus GitHub repository, and you could look at the the docs
and
that way.
in the writing your own extension part, because this went in 1.7, the extension metrics. So the thing, I'll make it big.
Yeah,
Ooh,
sorry.
now I lost my.
Put you
Now I
back up
lost
here.
my page. Where did it go? Crap. I lost my page. Where is it? Okay. There. So 1.7, what went in with 1.7 is the metrics factory consumer build item and the metrics capability build item. So those, if you're writing your own extension and you want to shift over right away from that metrics capability check, which we're deprecating, then there's instructions for how to do that.
Okay,
they're actually way simpler than the last one. Like, this is way cleaner because there's just an optional. You can just use optional capability. So there's code samples and stuff in here.
Yeah, so that's because before Erin happened, or Micrometer happened, the Quarkus core was kind of tied to MicroProfiles approach. And what you did was just kind of untangle it in 1.7. And now and that's the API. If you've done an external extension, you move to that, and then when you get to 1.8, you get all this fancy graphs and stuff.
Yes, and then people can turn on the micrometer extension, and nothing will break.
And you'll learn how to play Dungeons and Dragons. So that's good. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and always go with a chaotic neutral character, right?
Yeah, I'm chaotic good.
Good. Okay. So, question towards the end here is, maybe you have some other stuff you want to cover as well, but it'd be cool to talk about like next steps, like where is this going to go, how everybody could get involved to help influence where it goes.
Yeah. So there's a couple things. I have just general, like, I got to go work with the Quarkus camel stuff. It's like I want to keep going through the extensions and stuff that are the other extensions that are using small Rye metrics and see if they can be optimized to bring in the micrometer stuff instead as an option. In some cases, it's a matter of flipping over. Like, we have this consumer of a metrics factory that some of our data source things use. So like that metrics factory builder, that's a generic type. So if you register your metrics that way, it will literally work with either provider and it doesn't matter. But there's some cases, like the way Jaeger works, where literally you're going to want to pick and different recorder methods to create different tracers or different adapter classes. And that's because you want to go as native to the metric system as you can. So in some cases, a generic approach is okay. And in other cases, you really want to get as close to the metric system as possible to reduce any overhead or lots of, adapter wrapper objects. Depends on what you want. So, it's chasing that through. And then I really want feedback for how you would want to configure meter filters, what other registry providers we should be enabling. I'm working with the New Relic community on their micrometer New Relic binder, which should then be real easy to opt into for Quarkus. Most of the stuff for enabling individual registries or individual binders is just glue to detect that classes are on the class path and, to turn it on unless you turn it off kind of thing.
Cool.
Awesome.
Okay.
Well, so do you want to have anybody have any closing thoughts? Sort of like last call.
I guess I would add that as part of this whole work, we're currently investigating how this fits into like an open telemetry world, because that's obviously a big play right now to align metrics and tracing. So that's something we're still figuring out. It's going to take some time. And obviously related to that as well, we're having discussions with the MicroProfile community about how to evolve metrics to better align with how Micrometer does things. But that's a long discussion.
Cool.
Awesome.
But Ken and Erin, thank you. And Erin, like you brought way more energy than I expected, so that's fun.
Yeah, and I have a prediction. I have a prediction that this is going to be a heavily viewed show. I just think this is really, really interesting. And it's like I learned a lot about D&D and metrics at the same time. And where else can you do that or achieve that?
Yeah. The first time I gave this talk, it was hilarious. The first question I got from the back of the room, which edition are you running? Oh, all the nerds. Oh my God, we're all so bad.
Says the woman with the pie cup.
That's right. This is it's the best cup ever.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Anyway, before we head out, I'll just say to everyone who's still around listening on this live one, please do share and subscribe. Like, we're trying to get the word out to get more. We get about 1,000 to 1,500 views, which is good. But it'd be good to have more people on live to just have more questions. But yeah, so share what you can, and yeah, thank you.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Yep, thanks for having us.
And please subscribe to the channel, because that helps us know like if we're providing content that's useful to you. So thank you very much, everybody.